Thank you so much. The admiration is mutual. I've known Sam Daly Harris for many years. He used to tell the story, but I guess he dropped it from the repertoire, that when we first met, I asked if he was the Sam Daly Harris, having read his book. I am indeed, as you are, a big fan of the work of results. And this yearly conference is an important gathering of energy, a kind of battery charge. As we know, the work is not just what goes on this weekend. The work is what goes on when we leave here, when you go back to your groups, when you recruit new people. And the work of results is so important because it feeds you the information that you need. How are we going to deal with the need for greater funding for SNAP? How are we going to deal with the need for greater funding to cure tuberculosis? How are we going to deal with the need for the further support of maternal health? How are we going to deal with the need to support the Global Fund? But this morning I want to talk to you not only about the what. Ken Patterson, Meredith Dodson, Joanne Carter, all of the wonderful people who staff and work on the board at Results, make sure that you get those specifics. You get the what throughout the year, and you get the how throughout the year. But I want to talk to you this morning about the why. Because the why, for us to be very clear about the why, is to dig deep down into why it's not happening already. That is the deeper philosophical questions we have to ask ourselves. Yesterday, there were speakers who talked about the difference that it makes in someone's life, whether or not they can eat. We actually heard people say, well, this person became president of a country, but her friend, who was just as smart and had just as much potential, could not spread her wings and could not soar because her opportunities were capped by the chains that bind her. Now, yesterday, when we heard about the fact that Results was part of a larger international consortium of souls that made sure that the Global Fund was funded, and those of us in the United States made sure that the United States, in fact, would be giving its $1.6 billion to the Global Fund. And the entire room burst into applause. And the entire room got all excited because, yes, we succeeded. The United States is going to give its $1.6 billion to the Global Fund. And if you put it all together, the United States budget in terms of supporting efforts at ending global poverty, the United States efforts at development around the world comes to maybe $50 billion. And we're tempted to get all excited about that. But it's a short-lived excitement when you consider that we spend $700 billion a year on defense. What is going on this planet? What is going on in our country and what is going on around the world? That the people who lead the nations of the world still at the beginning, no longer even just the beginning, well into the 21st century, think that we are so ourselves morally corrupted, that we are willing to go along with a concept of strategic interests and vital national interests that really mean the economic interests of a few corporate interests on this planet as opposed to the humanitarian values of a sustainable world. This is why we are here. We are here because the poor of the world, the poorest of the poor, the people who have just as much potential. It was at a Results event that I heard Muhammad Yunus liken the deeply poor of the world to bonsai trees. He said a bonsai tree has everything that a regular tree has. It just can't get outside its limitations of those glass walls. The energy, the power, the creativity, the genius that would more than provide all of the energy and all of the economic abundance and all of the joy that the human race so wants to experience, and which is the only survivable future for ourselves, for our children, our children's children, lies within every single child on this planet. And what we should have on this planet is a massive realignment of investment of all resources in the direction of the children of the world. And that is why we are here, because those children and their parents do not have the money for the corporate advocates, for the corporate lobbyists. It is no accident that where you and I stand today, that this surrounding area is the richest real estate in this country. Why do you think the surrounding counties where we sit today is the richest real estate in America? I'll tell you why it's the richest real estate. It's because that's where all the lobbyists live. And all those highly paid corporate lobbyists who flood the halls of Congress day in and day out, assigned to our congresspeople, assigned to our senators, and as we know, assigned to our White House, are there to make sure that economic values, mainly driven to support the basically aristocratic paradigm by which a few corporate interests, multinational corporate interests, dominate the policy decisions of our country and most advanced countries of the world. And who do the poor have? The poor have you. But let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just that the poor have you. It's not just that mothers who need support for maternal health have you. It's not just that people with deep diseases like tuberculosis have you. The only survivable option for the human race has you. And what needs to happen now is that we need to be unabashed, we need to be unapologetic, we need to be passionate, we need to be vigorous, and we need to be vocal in saying so. The main strategic interest of the United States and of any advanced or developing country in this world is that so much unnecessary suffering on this planet is ameliorated. That is the main strategic interest for the human race. That should be considered the main strategic interest and the main vital interest of the United States and of every nation in the world. We need a shift in paradigm. And what results gives you is the ability to make a difference in this policy or that policy, and that is important. But what I want to make sure that we're all really keeping our eyes on as well is the larger context. And the larger context is a transformation in the thinking of the world. It is a transformation which comes up from the bottom of things. It is a transformation which has already occurred within the hearts and the minds of billions and billions and billions of people on this planet. I have felt in my career, throughout my career, I always feel like I'm not saying anything everybody I know isn't saying it, but I'm saying it when the microphone is on and I'm saying it with the lights are on, because it is time for us to stop whispering what most needs to be said. And that is the way humanity now organizes itself is insane. It is insane. We need to shift from an economic bottom line to a humanitarian bottom line. The bottom line should not be economics for anybody. The bottom line should be food for everybody. The bottom line should be opportunity for everybody. And as an American, this is particularly significant because this is the dream of democracy. The dream of democracy, radical 200 years ago and radical today, is the idea that we throw off the chains that bound us. And the chains that bound us were the chains of an aristocratic paradigm. The chains of aristocracy is the idea that apparently only a few people are entitled. A few people in the Western world, certainly before the founding of my country, were deemed entitled to the land, entitled to education, entitled to wealth creation opportunity, entitled, in other words, on the material plane to actualize their dreams and to have an expectation that their children could actualize theirs. With the founding of American democracy, that entire paradigm was repudiated. And instead, we found ourselves on the principle that all men are created equal, that all men are endowed by God with the inalienable rights to life and to liberty and to the pursuit of happiness, that there should be religious freedom, that people should believe in any God they want or in no God if they want, the government would actually be instituted to secure those rights. And the government would be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That last one, of course, brought forth by Abraham Lincoln. And it is for these principles that people have struggled, and it is for these principles that people have died. And it is because of these principles that millions of people around the world have not only come to this country, but come to this country even today, as evidenced by this international conference, because despite the fact that America has never in our history totally actualized those principles, generation after generation, there have been those who tried. And since our beginnings, there has been this tension between those who really believed in those principles and the irony of the fact that many of the men who actually risked their lives to imbue those principles into our founding documents were themselves slave owners. This is not new. It's not like we don't know this. It's not like the rest of the world doesn't know this. It's that on one hand, we purport to stand on these profound principles, and on the other hand, sometimes we have been the most heinous transgressors against them. But what matters is the larger narrative, the larger storyline, because historically in time, we tend to self-correct. We had slavery in this country, but then we had abolition. We had the suppression of women, and then we had waves of feminine and the suffrage movement giving women the right to vote. We had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in the American South, and then we had the civil rights movement. We had the denial of rights to gay people, and then we had the Human Rights Campaign and the marriage equality movement. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, even though Americans often get it wrong, over time we tend to self-correct. As Winston Churchill said, Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after they have exhausted every other option. And in every generation, there have been those who stood up and they said to the forces that would undermine democratic principle, that would take us back to an aristocratic system, you stop right there. I read a book by Sue Monk Kidd called The Invention of Wings, and it's about two women called the Grimke sisters in the American South who were born into slave-owning family in South Carolina. Fascinating figures in history. They were born into a slave-owning family and became in time, having been converted by the abolitionists, they became in time two leading abolitionists and feminists. And the book made me think about the psychological and emotional and spiritual bridge that someone crosses from anti-slavery to abolitionist. All that anti-slavery meant was that you realized slavery was insane, you'd never live in a slave-owning state, you think those people are crazy, you would never own another human being, etc. Noble, to be sure, but that of itself would not move the needle for one slave. But something happens when you've crossed the bridge, and each of you have crossed that bridge, or you would not be here. And that's from I'm against it to not on my watch. That is what those stand for who say, I'm going to be more than against this craziness. I'm going to take a stand in my own life. I'm going to take a stand for the repudiation of that aristocratic paradigm. And that aristocratic paradigm is never dead. Sometimes it merely sleeps. And it's back. It's back in the United States, and in many places it never left. This idea that only a few people have the right somehow to bread itself, that only a few people have the right to live their lives soaring. And that some people sincerely believe that that's a better way to run the world, because if you run the world with this kind of economic vitality in mind, that will make people happy. But the truth of the matter is, if you just help people be happy, everybody has within them a creative spirit. Both this country and around the world, Muhammad Yunus was right. There's nothing that some rich white child in a wealthy neighborhood in an advanced democracy has. There's no potential within them which is not shared by every child on this planet. There's no potential within some child that is not within every child. You know, when I was growing up, my mother was a very traditional housewife. She gave the entirety of the focus of her life to her husband, to her children, and to our home. And when I was growing up, I thought my mother's life was not important enough. And it took me decades to realize how wrong I was about my mother's life. My mother kept just repeating, first the children, first your home, first the children, first the home. I thought I wanted to go out and do something important, not realizing until many years later that there is nothing more important than the children in the home. It's just that the women of the world today are emerging into the full realization, ready to actualize the idea that, yeah, that's true, nothing's more important than the children in the home, and every child on this planet is one of our children, and the earth itself is our home. So there's something really deep going on here, something real deep going on here, particularly for those of us who are American, because we are living at a time, as much as at any other time in our history, where the assault on the roots of our democracy are in full force. And it is a particularly dangerous assault, because there had been other times where the assault was in the form of what could be seen socially and politically as an operable tumor. It was slavery. It was the denial of the rights of women to vote. It was institutionalized white supremacy, and we knew what we had to do. We knew that we had to abolish slavery. We knew that we had to give women the right to vote. We knew that we needed civil rights legislation. But in a way, ladies and gentlemen, the assault today is almost worse. It's more like a cancer that is already metastasized. It's a cancer that is metastasized, and it's wrapped itself around some healthy organs. But you know what? We can handle it because we are going to deal with it holistically. We know that in a case like this, it's not just as simple as getting rid of one particular wicked manifestation. We must boost our societal immune system. And the societal immune system is the citizenry. We would not be where we are today, and I beg your indulgence to those of you who are not from the United States, but those of you who are not from the United States know full well that the whole world is in trouble if this country goes down. And so what we need to do is to realize, to take ownership. And I know that this cannot be said by a member of Results, but it still can be said by the rest of this country. What we're experiencing now in terms of the assaults on democratic freedoms in this country could not have happened if there had not been such widespread political disengagement and complacency on the part of too many spoiled, entitled Americans. But what has happened is that there has been an awakening. And as I said last night and I said yesterday morning, the good news is this: Results isn't such a hard sell anymore. It used to be, oh, will you come to my meeting? Because what we do is we actually get together and we figure out how to advocate for the political will to end hunger and poverty around the world. And a lot of people would look at you and go, nerd that you are, in their mind. No, I'm not really into politics. But Americans have learned over the last couple of years what the French have always said: if you don't do politics, politics will do you. And many, many Americans realize that, oh, politics has done us now. And so the whole idea of poverty in America, and many of you probably read the article on the front page of the Washington Post yesterday, where the new line among certain people in our congressional and senatorial leadership is that basically it's okay, this whole poverty thing in America. We don't need these programs because basically the problem has been handled. When they cannot deal with persuasion, they go for flat-out lies. And so what is happening today is that we need a rising up of the immune system. Every single citizen is an immune system in the body politic of our civilization, of our human civilization. And so today, when you try to get people to your results group, be very aware how many of them already know you are giving them a gift. Many people now want to get back into politics. They know we have a big problem, but they don't remember the civics that they learned in the 7th grade. Too many states in America don't even require civics education. If you don't learn the Bill of Rights when you're a child, then you don't know to be appalled as an adult when you see it not happening. I know when I was going somewhere once, many years ago, and I said to my friend, I was in this school and the kids weren't saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And when I was a child, we all said the Pledge of Allegiance. Why aren't the kids saying the Pledge of Allegiance? One God, one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. And my friend burst. He said, because there is no fucking liberty and justice in America. And I said, well, I understand that, but I also understand this. The fact that I pledged that there would be when I was a little girl and put my hand over my heart is what turned me into a woman who gets really pissed off when I see it not happening. It's a pledge. It's not a guarantee. And that is what we have been raised to believe, that democracy was just a right. Democracy is not a right. Democracy is more than a right. It is also a responsibility. Just as in the Jewish religion, it is said that every generation must rediscover God for itself. Every generation must rediscover democracy for itself. And that is what results is. Results is a way into the powers of democracy. And we are living at a time where people want those tools. They want it in America, they want it in Africa, they want it in Latin America, they want it in South America, they want it in Europe, they want it in Russia, they want it in Asia. It is a yearning of the heart. And that is why it is going to happen. That is why it is going to tear down all walls in time. It is the only survivable option for the human race. So democracy is not just a political calling. And the tools by which we reach our governments and help make change happen is not just a political calling, it is a moral calling. The founding of democracy and the actualization of democracy is more than just a political idea. It is the very sacred notion that human beings should be able to soar. Human beings should be able to express their God-given potential. Human beings should be able to spread their wings. All human beings should be able to spread their wings. And it is our sacred responsibility. It is our sacred responsibility as children of God, particularly those of us who have been fortunate enough to have the capacity to spread our wings, to bequeath to our children, and to foster in our time all the powers that allow that to happen, and to stand forth in our time and to say, stop right there, to all the forces which would mitigate against it. I just came back from Israel. And before I was in Israel, I was in Austria. And I visited a concentration camp. I have read and seen recently stories about the Rohingya in Burma. I've seen about the Yazidis in Iraq. All of us know that many of the evils, whether it has to do with slavery in the United States or slavery anywhere else today, whether it has to do with the Holocaust and the Nazi regime in Germany, or whether it has to do with any of the horrors and the genocidal manifestations that we see on this planet today. The difference is made when people no different than you and me, no more perfect than you and me, no more entitled than you and me, but fired up and empowered by the love in our hearts, stand up and say, stop right there. And what I was shown, as horrifying as it was to visit crematoriums, as horrifying as it was to actually see the manifestations of wickedness when it is turned into a collective force, as was true in the Nazi regime, I also was very aware when I saw those plaques, and I was reminded what happened when those camps were liberated and the Allies did prevail. So even though Hitler began his wicked regime with the film Triumph of the Will, it was ultimately not a triumph of the will that succeeded, it was a triumph of the heart. What is happening on the planet today is that not only those who hate, but those who simply do not care. The problem is not just people who hate. The people who are voting against making sure that children are fed are not necessarily people who hate those kids, but simply people who do not care about those kids, and that is beastly enough. The problem was not, just as Prima Levi has said, there are very few monsters on the planet, and monsters we could handle. The problem are the millions of functionaries who will go along. And that's what results means. We will not go along. We will not go along. And so what happens is that those who hate and those who do not care have the power of governments, have the power of money, have the power of technology. But we have the power of a more survivable option for the human race. And when you have the power of that which is good, that which is compassionate, we know that love restores reason and not the other way around. But miracles such as that kind of transformation are born of conviction. And that is what is happening on the planet today. It's not that more people hate or more people don't care. It's that those who hate and those who do not care have conviction behind their economic principles. We need to display as much conviction behind love as some people now display behind their hatred and behind their lack of compassion. This country This country is going to change, and this world is going to change in large part because the United States, for better or for worse, has so much power by the sheer size and material force of our country. I'll tell you what's going to change things. When more people of heart and of conscience and of love flood those halls of Congress. And that is what you're doing this week. If anybody says to you, well, you know, what you're doing is not exactly curing cancer, you say, oh, yes, it is. You be proud of what you're doing here this week. You proclaim what you're doing here this week. Don't you go timid on some congressman or senator. You make it clear. You get those sentences in. You get those phrases in. Even if he or she doesn't quite know what you're talking about, that's okay, because somebody else is going to mention it. And then ultimately, when that senator or that congressman hears it enough, he'll say, I wonder what these people are talking about. They're saying that money shouldn't even be our bottom line. They're saying that love should be our bottom line. They're saying we should have a politics of love. They're saying we should have a politics of conscience. Well, those people must be naive. Let me tell you something. Anybody who thinks we can survive the opposite, they are naive. You remember that, and you be proud. And when you say, I am a results volunteer, you say it with a level of pride and dignity, just like those who knew that they were abolitionists, and people said, what are you talking about? You're not going to end slavery. What are you talking about? People who said, we're going to give women the right to vote. And people said, what are you talking about? People who said, we're going to have civil rights legislation, and we're going to end segregation in the American South. And people say, what are you talking about? And it reminds me of what happened when Lord Mountbatten said to Gandhi early in the Indian independence movement, he said, what, little man, you think we're going to just give you India? You know what Gandhi's response was? Yes. Because it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And that's what we have to know. We have to know that we are empowered with what Martin Luther King called cosmic companionship. It doesn't matter if they have the money. It doesn't matter if they have the corporate influence. It doesn't matter if they are leading with lack of compassion. They are not bad people. They have just not seen the light that we see. They have not seen the possibility that we see. And we are part of a large historical narrative of people in every generation all over the world who have known what's possible, and the world in time goes forward. So it is our time to self-correct. Capitalism, multinational capitalism, has swerved from its ethical centered. Unfettered capitalism is trying to just move its tentacles throughout the world at the cost of so much human suffering. Its day is over because the human heart is what matters, and the human heart is what should drive things. Human love is what should drive things. And if anything should be obvious at this point, certainly in this country, is that the voices of those who say otherwise have led us to where we are today. It's time for us to not be angry. It's simply time for us to say, you know what, move over. We're taking it from here. Thank you. Go do your thing. God bless you, everybody. Thank you so much.